This is an age of disruption, of profound revolutionary change.
What we're really asking ministers is to empower the ambassadors.
The only thing that you really push forth is the truth.
You don't see many women represented when it comes to the decisions as to how to handle the pandemic.
Hi, my name's Carl Matheson and I'm the Senior Climate Correspondent at Politico Europe. Welcome to everybody in the room and joining online to this discussion about remaining competitive in a greener Europe. I wanted to sort of introduce our panel, but first of all to frame the discussion because the last week I feel has been really an interesting week in regards to this question because we've seen the European Parliament vote down reforms on the ETS and really centred around a question of competitiveness and how industry can how fast industry can adapt to the phase out of free pollution credits under the ETS. So I feel like that moment in the European Parliament was very dramatic, but also a really nice place to kick off our discussion. We're just waiting on one of the key people in that moment. Jutta Gutterland is going to join us in a minute, and she's an MEP for the Socialists and Democrats and the lead on the emissions trading system file for the Socialists and Democrats. So she's going to join us in the room in a second. I think she's just getting mic'd up. But I also welcome Magnus Ankerstrand. He's the president of Yara Clean Ammonia. So we've got we can get some industry perspectives, but also beyond the ETS, but also talking about how industry can push on and find the right regulatory frameworks that it needs to succeed in line with the Green Deal. Joining us online, we've also got Mauro Petriccioni. Hi Mauro, Mauro's the Director General of DG Klima, so we've got the Commission here, and also Adam Gwiborg-Setwatensky. I hope I pronounced your surname right, Adam, but Adam's the Deputy Minister of Climate and Environment in Poland, so thank you both for joining us online. I wanted to start with you, Mauro, and just really ask, a little bit about what your reflection of what we saw in the Parliament, but maybe the bigger theme is there a tension between climate and competitiveness in Europe, or is it a positive synthesis? How do you see it?
Well, first of all, thanks very much for inviting me here. I'm very happy to be with you. On the Parliament, I mean, the Parliament did not vote down the reform. The Parliament did not yet agree on its negotiating position with the Council. Okay, political maneuvering around the positions are never pretty in a democracy. They're even uglier outside democracies. But it's perfectly normal. This is big, it's important. I think it's perfectly normal that the Parliament has a hard debate on this. And if you look at the parameters were not, we don't want this. The parameters were, how much do we want of this? If anything, with a lot of people pushing for more ambition in the ETS than what the Commission has proposed. So I'm not worried about that. I think that we will soon get a negotiating position by the Parliament, hopefully from the Council as well this month, and then we'll start the trilogues already in July to get into into our stride in the autumn. So the question of competitiveness underlies all this, but I think in the last bit of your question you also gave yourself the answer. The fact is that our current system shouldn't be competitive. Industrial development based on fossil fuels is only competitive because society is paying the bill. And our society, certainly in Europe, is saying very loudly, we're fed up with that. We no longer intend to foot the bill. That's why the entire legislative and regulatory process of the Union is aimed at changing the rules of the game and showing what is the true cost of using fossil fuels and putting that cost over those who insist on using those fossil fuels. And that opens the space to the people who are prepared to invest and take risks in new technologies. And my last point on this is that many of the things that we need to do are intrinsically linked to competitiveness. You know my past, I spent decades working on trade policy. If there's one thing which has kept our industry afloat and competitive at world level, because we do remain competitive, even though we have fragilities, we have weaknesses, and the others are not sleeping. So we are under challenge, but we have kept competitive because of the efforts the European industry has made to become energy efficient. And we are, I think only the United States is more energy efficient than Europe is on average. We've done a very good job. Industry has done a very good job. So the relationship with competitiveness is not one of either or. Either you have a clean industry or you have a competitive industry. We have fake competitiveness of the current system based on all of us as citizens paying for that. And we have an emerging system of more competitive industry, cleaner and based on a healthier relationship with society and with the planet. The problem we have is that the transitioning from one to the other isn't an automatic process and isn't a smooth one. And it's one where we need to work hard to make sure that it's not excessively disruptive.
I wanted to, thank you for joining us, Jutta. I wanted to just jump in because we've been talking about what's been going on in Parliament, and yesterday you announced a deal with Renew and the EPP, so to sort of resolve the kind of position. And I guess one of the things that Mauro just said was that that there are sort of certain players who are pushing back on and viewing competitiveness in one way, in a way that sort of maybe they need to push back on faster ambition, whereas there's another framing that's competitive players will go further and faster and innovate. The question of lobbying came up a lot in the last week. Rather than it being a political problem just between groups in the Parliament, is the problem in the Parliament that the lobby groups actually were too strong and too powerful in that moment, and were able to, you wanted pollution credits to be phased out in 2025, you got 2027. Were they phased out too slowly? And was the lobby too strong?
Yes and no. I would say it was a lot of lobbying last time too. I was responsible for the S&D group also last legislature, and I remember there were lots of interest, and we were quite shocked. It was my first period also, so the amount of interest and all active proposals to slow down, it was a bit of a shock for me last time. And this time I would say, and that's also my message here, that I'm happy about the deal, and I think that we accomplished something together yesterday. So I think that we overcome that. But then yes, it was a lot, and it was a lot also between the NV vote and in front of plenary. And it was lots of focus on the phase in, phase out, and also on the overall ambition rebasing LRF. And I was more aware that it would be a lot when it came to the free allocation, that we were aware that there are economic interests here. But on the more overall ambition, I have found also big will from the industry to achieve the climate law and understand that we also need, in order to do so, we also need some room for maneuver in the trilogues. So I was a bit shocked over the resistance there. So yes and no. It's not that different from last legislature, but I would have assumed that we had come a bit further when it comes to the understanding on the climate law and that we need some room for maneuver.
I think, is it true though that the difference between the last round was, you know, when you're talking about the climate law, you're talking about quite broad concepts. Now we're talking about, with Fit for 55, we're talking about extremely specific policies that are going to hit company balance sheets. So it's sort of understandable then that, you know, the pressure grows from industry who feel that they're being disadvantaged potentially. And I wondered whether you think that the Parliament now is a different beast. If what we saw in the last week was the beginning of a more divided Parliament over climate ambition.
It's always difficult to be sure what we see and how it will be in a year or so. Yes, it was a bit of a setback on this if you compare to the euphoric feeling from the Parliament on the climate law, and I was very aware of that since I was the rapporteur. I was very aware that that was a very good push from the Parliament in that, and we were very united between the groups. And this time it was more conflicts, more tension. On the other hand, it is more difficult now when we come to the sectorial legislation. It becomes more concrete. It becomes more obvious who needs to pay and how will it be in reality. So it's not that. I would not say that it's very surprising that this would happen. And we also said it, I remember 1 year ago. It will be more details. It will be more conflict when we come to this phase. On the other hand, I want to encourage my colleagues for the future who will also work with other sectorial legislations on the climate that please understand the role that the Parliament has. It is also to give some room for maneuver, to give some push, to be the more progressive part in the Union. And if we believe that the very last sentence that we have in our report is going to be reality, after the trilogue, then we will not be very successful in the trilogue. So we need to understand that we need a little bit more than the Commission needs. And I would like to say to Mauro too, because I'm very impressed with the Commission and the work in general, and I also think that the climate package has really been something else. Something astonishing, historical. I can use this word and I don't blush. I really think it was special with the climate legislation and the package. But that said, the Commission should also be aware that they should not become its own enemy by dragging back the Commission. I know Mauro is not doing that, so it's not against you, but I also know that there is always this will from the EU Commission to get the positions to where the Commission are, and that's natural. But sometimes maybe you can be too good in your own attempt to get to your position. So then, when we're actually there in the trialogue, it will be extremely difficult to reach there. So I just want to give this little advice, since I think this will be my last work in the European Parliament. So I would like to give this little advice that for the future, please give a little room to the Parliament. Don't go in and be extremely worried about every ambition part that the European Parliament is trying to deliver.
Magnus, I wondered what your view on this idea of, I guess, broadly a kind of positive versus negative competitiveness is. I mean, Yara's obviously got one foot in the kind of green future, ammonia, hydrogen. You're also part of industry associations that have pushed back on some of the climate and the more ambitious climate positions that the Parliament and others have taken. So how do you see the right balance and you know, your role as industry, like how you're affecting change in the institutions?
No, thank you for the question, and thank you for inviting me here. I think for us, I mean, competitiveness is about your ability to adapt, right? It's always been like that. Now it's you know, climate law, but in the past it's been other changes that, you know, forces companies to adapt, and you know, companies adapt. Some succeed and some fail. That's sort of the way it's always been. I think our position on this, and this has been our position for quite a while, is that we definitely recognize the need to do something, and we also are supportive of the actions that are being taken in general, and I think we also very much realize that there needs to be a price on carbon to generalize it in order to make this shift happen. And as a fertilizer company, but also a company that works, you know, far down into the ag value chain, we work on climate solutions also for our customers. But of course, the main topic in this context is of course our production facilities, and when it comes to fertilizer and the production facilities, the ammonia production is really where the problem is. I mean, there are CO2 emissions from other parts as well, but you know, the real the big emissions come from the ammonia production. And we have for quite a while looked at different ways of decarbonizing our ammonia production. There are ways of doing that, but also we are now working very actively on introducing ammonia as a zero carbon fuel in the same way as hydrogen is in principle. Ammonia contains a lot of hydrogen, and both for the shipping industry but also for power production in certain areas as well. And I think, you know, in general, we see this as an opportunity, both of course something that we have to do because for the obvious reasons, but also a big business opportunity. So in general, we are very supportive of the actions that are being taken. And as a global company, we are of course exposed to different legislation in different parts of the world. We see, I mean, obviously the momentum is largest in Europe, but we also see the momentum in other countries as well. So I think in terms of being sort of on both sides of the table, I think we're pretty firmly placed on the table that we want this change. But I think we also, what's important to us is to emphasize a couple of things, and one being that we need a price on carbon, and that price needs to be pretty high in order to facilitate this change. If you take the shipping industry as an example, you need a relatively high price on their emissions in order for them to use ammonia as a clean fuel, for that to be, you know, profitable. And I think we believe, you know, very firmly that you know, politicians, whether it's in Europe or elsewhere, they need to put the framework in place. CO2 tax, you know, whatever shape or form or name, it's critical, because if there's not a price to pay for the carbon, then, you know, how can we compete if we decarbonize, right? I think that's sort of the easy mechanism. I think the other important element is a level playing field, because if we invest in decarbonization, if we increase our cost by decarbonization, and you know, imports into Europe of our products come from companies who are not faced with the same challenges, I think, you know, the outcome is pretty obvious. They will outcompete us and pretty fast. I think we're very much supportive of these actions, but our focus is really that we need to price the carbon. We need to ensure a level playing field, and then the market will take care of the rest. Of course, there needs to be permitting for renewable electricity. There are a lot of other things that politicians need to do as well. But I think we need to let the market mechanism solve this and put the prerequisite in place for that.
Adam, the role of government in this is interesting. You know, this also provides many political problems for governments. And I think one question I'm interested in is, how does a government, when does a government sort of withdraw support for industry or let companies that fail to innovate fail, and how do you sort of strike the right balance between helping companies through this transition, and when do you sort of cut them off and say, well, you have chosen not to innovate, you've resisted this, when, like, at what point do you draw the line, and how do you make those judgments?
Well, I think that's a very interesting point, and it's a point that clearly relates to what we were discussing earlier on the impact of competitiveness. I think we look at these issues at European level on average. It may be something that is more of an opportunity for the European economy, but then when you look at individual companies or even at individual sectors, sometimes these policies are very costly, and they can be an opportunity. But if we fulfill certain conditions, if we give time to adapt to these sectors, if we provide them support to innovate and develop these new technologies, I don't think it is really the role of government to we're not going to be holding the hands of the business. I think that the industry has to work on the solutions, has to find the solutions necessary to decarbonize our economy. But we can do what we can do as government is to say to framework to support them in this endeavor, in this innovation. One thing, though, that is very important in this context is, I would say, all the sectors that have a very direct impact on citizens. And we see that especially bluntly today with the very high energy prices. And I'm thinking, sectors like heating, like, transport, where you see direct impact on citizens. There are some services where you can just not accept that companies would go bankrupt. And for example, in Poland, we have huge district heating networks. You could not let district networks go district heating networks go bankrupt because they have to provide heat to citizens. And for these sectors, we need to find ways for the investments to take place. And that's where, jumping on one comment that was made earlier about the need for a price signal. I think the need for a price signal is important, and it's an important role of DTS, but it's not enough. We also need to have instruments to make sure that the necessary investments will happen. And so not only have that price signal, but have, legislation, funds necessary to support investments where they are necessary.
Just wanted to ask you very specifically, because I guess, as you said, it's not your job to hold the hands of companies. At issue in the discussions in the Parliament is this idea of when we phase out the free allowances. So what position will Poland be taking into the trilogues and the discussions with Council around the date of, the deal yesterday was to begin the phase out in 2027. Is that something that Poland can agree to?
I think there are differences in different sectors, and there are sectors where I'm thinking of aviation, for instance, not covered by CBAM, but where we could actually get rid of free allowances much quicker, and we would even say as Poland that we could get rid of free allowances in aviation starting from the entry into force of that provision, because actually there is no real carbon leakage in that sector. If you are flying from Warsaw to Brussels, you are flying from Warsaw to Brussels. You're not going to be flying from Moscow to Beijing. Yeah? So the carbon leakage in that sector is inexistent. And for the CBAM covered sector, I would say that what is important is that there is a lot of unknowns, and we acknowledge that there is a lot of technical difficulties in the implementation of this measure. And we're not too sure about the impacts, and that's why we think we should take the time to assess what the impact really is of that instrument. If that instrument is really having the effects we expect it to have, and we would be rather, having a longer test phase, even if it means that once we are sure that the CBAM works the way we intended it to work, we get rid of free allowances very quickly, almost instantly, I would say. So a bit of a different approach maybe than what has been taken in the Parliament. Give us some time to assess really what is really the impact of the CBAM, but possibly once we are sure it works, possibly decide to get rid of free allowances much quicker.
Okay. I've got a couple of questions from people online, and if anyone wants to join online, please join in the conversation. But I've got one question from Tom Parker, who is a question for you, Mauro. Tom says, you mentioned the emergence of new critical technologies as being central to EU future competitiveness. Mauro, can you speak a bit more to that and actually be specific about which technologies that you believe are key to Europe's competitiveness and maybe how Europe can sort of support the emergence of those techs?
Thanks. Well, that is the core question, because in reality, what we face here is an investment challenge. Because, okay, one thing is putting the right price on the technologies and the products that use carbon. Another thing is the fact that all that industry, mostly, has already invested. That investment is amortized. We are basically now paying for the operating costs. Whereas when it comes to the new technologies, we're also paying for the investment. And I think collectively, we have to realize that in order to affect this transformation, we'll have to pay those investment costs. The question is how we distribute that cost in a manner which is fair, equitable, and does not overburden those who can't afford to pay their fair share of those costs, and how do all of us, all the others who can afford to pay, contribute to the effort. Now, when you look at the technologies, power to begin with, and we've done the large part of the job. Renewables, in terms of operating costs, are by far the cheapest technology available. We're still paying for investment costs, and we need to invest more. That's where our problem is. Then, if you move to fuels, because not every renewables produce electricity, we're not invested enough yet in the technology that use electricity. Heating homes is one thing. We need to invest. We invested massively a few decades ago in moving from coal and oil in most of Europe, not everywhere, as Adam will be ready to remind us, for historical reasons, into gasifying our heating. We have to make the same investment in moving to electrification, in parallel with improving our supply of green electricity.
I just want to stop you on that, Mauro, because the Commission's proposed also to make making gas investments in gas as a sustainable investment under the taxonomy. So, if you're encouraging a phase out of that now and a shift, how does that match?
Yeah, wait a minute. You have to look at the time issue. We've always been extremely clear. By 2050, gas has to be out of the system, or carbon has to be out of gas. We've never said that had to happen by 2030 or any other date, but by 2050, if we want to be net zero, there cannot be any gas with carbon into our system. Now, personally, I think it would going to be a lot easier to get rid of gas than to get rid of carbon in gas, but if I'm demonstrated wrong, that's fine too. We are now in a different situation where our main source of gas has to go for the reason we all know. And therefore, this is challenging the role of gas as a technology of transition. The whole taxonomy issue was about giving us a role in a transition that's meant to last 30 years. I think we'll have to rethink that role because gas will continue to have a role, but it's unlikely to be exactly the same that it had before, and probably less a role, which is the whole thing about the repower strategy, ramping up our renewables, ramping up investment in electrification, ramping up investment in hydrogen, not only as a stabilizer of the system, but somebody's got to use that hydrogen. You're not just keeping in caverns. At some point, if it has to work as a stabilizer, it has to be employed. And at the moment, we don't have enough technologies that use hydrogen. So, green steel, mobility, the point that Magnus made about the use of ammonia, those are all fundamental short-term priorities that we need to pursue. We need to move mobility onto different fuels. That's a whole strand of technology development that's well advanced. It is not the technology that's missing; it is deployment on the ground. The industrial production, the other set of technologies, which is extremely promising, but it's not there yet, is in the chemical sector. We will not be able to transform our society and get rid of plastics. But how do we make sure that those plastics are more recyclable and to the extent that they need carbon, that carbon is in a closed circuit and does not get into the atmosphere.
Jutta, I wanted to bring you into this conversation because also the Environment Committee this week sort of raised its objection to the taxonomy and having including gas and nuclear in there. So maybe you want to speak to that point, or.
Yes, I wanted to say that I think Mauro is absolutely right that the most efficient investments are in the renewables, and you said it very well. I don't need to develop that further. But therefore, the taxonomy proposal that we voted on this week was a U-turn for climate from the Commission. And I think it was more due to interest from that industry than actually promoting the most costly, efficient, and also for climate best alternatives for Europe. So I think the Parliament hopefully will help the Commission in realizing this, so that we are the gate watchers here for climate and a more reasonable and more economic friendly also investments for the future. But I also wanted to say on business very quick, because we spoke about whether the Parliament is divided, where we go and how the situation is. I see that the industry is very divided today, and it has been mentioned also when it comes to the interest of going faster vis-a-vis going slower. You hear both today. That was also different one mandate ago. Then it was more everyone who was hesitating and wanted us to go slower. And I have been seeing, not at least from my home country and from the Nordic part of Europe, that go faster, go better, faster when it comes to ambition in the whole system with the rebasing LRF, go faster when it comes to the free allocation. We want to phase them out. Improve the benchmark so the front runners are promoted. Don't invest in a system that promotes the ones who should not be there. Invest in us who are developing the new technology. And then people say, oh, but it's easy for you, you're from Sweden. Very easy. That's why it's so easy for you to be ambitious. But then I say, we were ambitious last time too. We wanted this last time too. We were the one who wanted more ambition on the table when it comes to both rebasing, and the Swedish proposal were there. So my government was really active last legislature on improving the system. That's the reason why we went from the €5 to the €80 improvement. That's actually a lot due to the Swedish proposal. How come our industry are better than industries who don't have as tough politicians? I'm just asking. And yeah, I think people might rethink this when they realize that high standards from politics improve the industry.
Adam, do high standards from politics improve the industry?
I think definitely you see huge changes in this regard, in the way that the transition is perceived. That's what I've observed in Poland. You know, I've been dealing with these topics since I started working in administration about 10 years ago, and I must tell you that, you know, the way even Polish companies were reacting to these topics 10 years ago. It was very different. And now when I look at my energy sector, when I look at the industry in Poland, I see that they're all competing, and who can be the greenest, the fastest, and transform their portfolio. And what I have to do then as a government is make sure that they do have the appropriate tools, the appropriate support they need to make that transition possible. But I also have, to be realistic, and I clearly know that it's not enough to be telling, oh, I want to be ambitious, carbon neutral by 2022 or whatever. But it's about really implementing these measures on the ground. And I think very often when we discuss this topic in Brussels, we tend to focus very much on the headline figure of ambition and forget all these measures that are critical to reach that ambition. Let me give you one example, just with the last communication of the Commission, REPowerEU, an increased target in renewables, and the Commission has proposed one measure to accelerate the development of renewables electricity with making permitting easier and faster. And that's, I think, a great thing in principle, but that's electricity is just one part of renewables. What are we doing for heating? What are we doing for transport? There is no proposal in that communication. So how can we say we're going to be faster, more renewables if we are only addressing one of the three sectors that are concerned? We really have to spend more time on giving the tools to the industry that they need to transform.
I'm going to bring Mauro in to respond in a minute, but Magnus, I just wanted to get from you a sense of, what is one specific policy that can support you, that you want to come out of the Fit for 55 package, or that you want governments in Europe to implement?
I think, if I have to choose one, it's very easy. It's clarity on the price of carbon. Because that's what we put into our business case, and of course we have a purpose and vision, mission, all these other things. But we also have investors and shareholders, and at the end of the day, we have to defend that the investments that we do are profitable. And if there's a price of carbon, you put that into the business case. If you can avoid that price by decarbonizing, that's implicit revenue stream, and I think that's how it has to work. Because I think what we're sometimes missing a little bit in the dinner speeches part of all of this is the massive change that we're talking about. Because we have, industry today and electricity and heating and whatever it is has for the last 100 years been built on oil and gas, and transforming all of that by 2030 is, I think, it is a massive change, and I think. Sometimes we let ourselves, be somewhat fooled about, from the electrolyzer industry that says that, we're going to get this many megawatts in place by 2028. And so it's not that easy, right? So I think in order to get there, you have to start now, and you have to have clarity on what the investment case for decarbonizing will look like. If not, the answer is if there's not clarity, then investment decisions will be postponed, right? We can't make an investment decision based on that we think that the carbon price will be this much, and then 2 years later, the politicians changed their mind and said, nah, it's not going to happen anyway. So, great that you did your big change and you increased your cost, but everybody else can continue as before, so you're out of the market. I mean, a little bit tabloid, but I think it is almost that easy. And I think the other element of that is when you think about the scale of things that need to change, you have to use taxation to achieve it, both in terms of course, tax on what you're not supposed to do, but I think also tax credits in order to, or different ways of tax credits to get the investments that you want. Because I think the current setup with sort of bespoke support for certain projects is, it's good in the sense that it will make some projects happen, but there's no way you can do that at the scale you need, because eventually you're going to run out of money, right? Or inflation is going to get you, and that just won't bring you to the scale you need. If you take, for instance, in the US, and you can debate the purpose or not, but the mechanism works in the sense that they have a tax credit of $50 per ton of CO2 that you store. And what happens? You see a flurry of investments in CCS. And sort of disregarding whether you like CCS or not, but the mechanism works, and it's universal, it's enshrined in law, and you can bring that into your business case, and that means that the good projects will go ahead and the bad ones will go away. I don't think politicians are the right ones, or bureaucrats are the right ones to choose projects. You know, that's a role for business, but you need to put the incentives in place and the right incentives. And I think if you have to have any chance of achieving what we need to achieve, we need to start. We need to start now. And there are some sectors that are really, really hard to abate. I would say our sector is hard to abate, but we can fix it. But then we have to start with the ones that we can fix right now.
Mauro?
Just 3 points. I mean, to Adam, I agree with his analysis of what's needed. I don't agree that we're not doing it. We have in our set of proposals also made a point that we will increase the use of the innovation fund, which is now worth about 40 billion. And if any of the proposals we've made goes through, it will be worth a lot more at the end of this legislative cycle. We're going to not only ramp up, accelerate the calls for project, ramp up the level, the amounts of the calls, but we're going to start concentrating on clusters of technologies. And one of the clusters is the technologies that actually use renewable electricity. And that, for instance, goes straight to the heart of the question of heating and direct advantage of citizens. Now, that doesn't happen on its own. It's not enough to invest in those technologies. We also have to invest in supporting people to install them. But as I said, it's been done in most of Europe to move from one polluting technology to a less polluting technology. It can be done again. I accept the skepticism of those who say, great, I accept the principle, but I don't believe you until I've seen you doing it. By all means, stay skeptical until you see us doing, but in the meantime, please help us do it. Ask for it as loudly as you can, because that will help us. Second point on what Magnus said, the CCS point. Look, we are doing our best to stay technology neutral. But at some point, being technology neutral means washing your hands of things. So at some point, we will propose choices. CCS is a technology that we have supported in terms of research and then deployment. Is still an important part of the Innovation Fund. In the first call for project, we had 2 large CCS projects, but we haven't seen CCS deployed in the market, and therefore we are not relying on CCS as part of our policy plans until we see that happening. But we will continue to support its deployment in the hope that it will play a role at some point. So let's be very clear, CCS isn't a panacea. Of course the technology works, we know that. But is it in the market? Well, we've been toying with this for 15 years now. Maybe the conditions weren't right, okay, but there's an issue there. And third point to Jutta, Jutta, I'm very happy with the Parliament keeps the Commission on the straight and narrow. It is part of your DNA. And yes, it's true, in the Commission, we do have a tendency to think that we know a lot. Because we do know a lot, but we're human. We don't know everything, and we can get it wrong just as much as everybody else. But that's why the drafters of the treaty were smart people. They made the Commission independent. They made the Commission capable of setting the facts straight, but they did not give the Commission the decision-making power. They gave it to the legislators. And I'm very happy with that. It can be uncomfortable on a daily basis, but you know, both as a citizen and civil servant, that works. And Jutta and I have been part of one such very successful exercise with the Governmental. So looking forward to repeating the experience.
Thank you, everybody. It's time to wrap up this conversation. I kind of just wanted to run around the table and get in a word or two. You know, we're facing, as a lot of you have said, we're facing a really steep slope to get to 2030, and it's going to take a huge amount of innovation and energy and commitment from companies and from politicians. Is there in all of your minds, is there one single policy that could, or failed policy that could, or policy failure that could slip us up on the way to 2030? What is the one biggest risk factor in promoting this innovation? So maybe Adam, you could just let me go first.
I would say that the major risk I see is ignoring social impacts of our policies. I think it has been something we're not doing too well in the past. We are trying to do it better now, but ignoring the social impacts of our policies, I think, is the major risk for the future.
Jutta?
It's the ETS that's the queen of the climate package, and it's definitely also, since it has that impact, it's also what can fail. So there is so much more emissions, and I don't think any of us are capable of understanding the size and the proportion of the different climate legislations. Therefore, we need to have lots of interest in this one being a good one.
Magnus?
Yeah, no, I think agree. It's the price of carbon. If we need to put that in there, but you also have to understand the consequences, and as you say, deal with those. But unless there's that very clear target, I think everything hinges on that.
Mauro, risk factor to finish.
I agree with Adam, but the trap we must avoid is of our ambition. Avoiding the social consequences means helping the public understand that we have an investment challenge. It's not a cost, it's an investment, but still we have to shoulder the burden, and that burden has to be shouldered unequally. Those who can must help, those who can't must be helped.
The social cost, the carbon cost, a great place to finish. Thank you everybody for joining us today online and in the room, and to our wonderful panelists. We'll see you all next time. Thank you.
This is an age of disruption, of profound revolutionary change.
What we're really asking ministers is to empower the ambassadors.
The only thing that you really push forth is the truth.
You don't see many women represented when it comes to the decisions as to how to handle the pandemic.